Hi, these are some frequently asked questions about the impeachment of state officers in the state of California. So, what's the impeachment authority that's granted to the California legislature? The California Constitution, like its federal counterpart, allows for the impeachment and removal of state officers by the legislature. Which house has the power of impeachment? In Section 18 of Article 4, the Assembly has the sole power of impeachment. Which house has the power of removal? Impeachments are tried by the Senate, and therefore they have the power of removal. What is required for a conviction and removal from office? A person may not be convicted unless by roll call vote entered in the journal, two-thirds of the membership of the Senate concurs in conviction and removal. Which officers are subject to impeachment by the legislature? State officers are those elected on a statewide basis, so the 9 constitutional offices, including members of the State Board of Equalization, as well as judges of the state courts, are all subject to impeachment. What is the basis for impeachment of state officers? It is only for misconduct in office. What happens with a Senate conviction? It may extend only to removal from office and disqualification to hold any office under the state. Is there potential criminal liability for misconduct in office? Yes, the person convicted or acquitted remains subject to criminal punishment. Does the Senate act like a court in trying an impeachment? Yes, Government Code Section 3020.5 states that the Senate, when it sits as the court of impeachment, is a court of record, and the officers of the Senate are the officers of the court. What are the requirements for an impeachment to proceed? Government Code Section 3021 specifies that all impeachments must be made by resolution that's adopted, originated in, and conducted by managers elected by the Assembly. What does the Assembly do with articles of impeachment? Government Code Section 3022 requires that the managers are to prepare articles of impeachment and present them at the bar of the Senate and prosecute them as the trial is to be before the Senate. To whom do the articles of impeachment go? Government Code Section 3023 provides that when an officer is impeached by the Assembly for a misdemeanor in office, the articles of impeachment are delivered to the President of the Senate, who, of course, is our Lieutenant Governor. What must the Senate do with these articles of impeachment? Government Code Section 3024 requires the Senate to assign a day for a hearing of the impeachment and inform the Assembly of that date. Now, how is a state officer notified about the upcoming trial in the Senate? Government Code Section 3025 requires the Senate President to serve the defendant with a copy of the articles of impeachment with a notice to appear and to answer at an appointed time and place. And Section 3026 requires the service to be made personally upon the defendant. What happens if the state officer does not appear? Government Code Section 3027 states that if the defendant does not appear, then the Senate may assign another day for hearing the impeachment, or the Senate may proceed to trial and judgment in the absence of that defendant. What rights and responsibilities are imposed on state officers? Government Code Section 3028 provides that when the defendant appears, the defendant may object in writing to the sufficiency of the articles of impeachment, or the defendant may answer the articles by an oral plea of not guilty. And then Section 3029 requires the defendant to answer the articles, and if the defendant pleads guilty or refuses to plead, then the Senate must render judgment of conviction against that officer. Now, what happens if the officer pleads not guilty? Then Government Code Section 3030 provides the Senate must try the impeachment at the time that it appoints, and the plea, the not guilty plea, is entered in the Senate Daily Journal. Is there an oath taken by state senators? Yes, Government Code Section 3031 requires the Senate Secretary to administer to all members of the Senate an oath truly and impartially to hear, try, and determine the impeachment. No member of the Senate can act or vote upon the impeachment without having taken that oath. What is the vote required of the Senate for a conviction? Government Code Section 3032 specifies the defendant cannot be convicted of an impeachment without the concurrence of 2/3 of the senators. If 2/3 of the members elected do not concur in the conviction, then the defendant must be acquitted. How is a conviction recorded? Government Code Section 3033 states that after conviction and at the time appointed by the Senate, that the members of the Senate must pronounce judgment in the form of a resolution that is then printed in the Senate Daily Journal. What's the punishment for conviction? In Government Code Section 3035, it specifies that the judgment may be that the defendant be suspended from office, or that the defendant be removed from office and disqualified from holding any office of honor, trust, or profit in the state. What happens when the articles of impeachment are presented to the Senate? It says in Government Code Section 3037 that the officer is temporarily suspended from his or her office, and that they cannot act in their official capacity until or unless they are acquitted. And finally, what happens when an officer is suspended? Government Code Section 3038 says that the office must be at once temporarily filled by an appointment made by the governor with the advice and consent of the Senate, meaning they vote by majority vote to confirm that nominee. And then that office is filled by the appointee until the acquittal of the impeached individual, or if that person is removed from office, then the vacancy is filled until the next election.